Good evening, class. We're so glad to have you joining us tonight. As you know, we have been studying the tribe of Gad. And so tonight we're going to continue with the study of the tribe of Gad. And if you have notes, if you will turn to page 4, we will be beginning with note 24. If for any reason you do not have notes, if you will look at the screen where you're watching the class tonight, you'll see there is a place there where you can print out the class notes for tonight. And if you don't see them, give us a call at the phone number on the website and we will be happy to mail them to you. We'll get them out to you probably the evening of the day you call, so we'll get them back to you as quickly as possible. So we are continuing our study of the tribe of Gad. By the way, if you would like to call in a question or call in a comment, we would greatly appreciate that, and I will answer it. If you will call in questions or write in and drop a line and give me your question, I will answer them at the beginning of the next class. Also, if you want to give in response to the lesson that you are receiving, you can do so by mailing it in or texting to give on the website. Appreciate that. That's what helps us to continue doing this and getting this teaching actually around the world. So, we are on page 4, note 24. We are talking about the tribe of Gad. And we're at the point of discussing World War II, and we said that during World War II, the Huguenots of France, part of, obviously, the tribe of Gad, and the Calvinists of Holland did more than any other groups in Europe, and that's throughout Europe, to save the lives of Jews from extermination. So now in note 24, prior to the time of the war, strangely enough, many Huguenots had moved to Berlin, Germany. And the reason was, in times past, this region had once been a Gothic center. And from there, believe it or not, many migrated to the United States of America. So now we see the Huguenots, part of the descendants of the tribe of Gad, moved to Berlin prior to the time of the war. And from there, many migrated to the United States. Only a few people of Israelite origin remained in the area. By that I mean very few of Israelite origin. Now, when we're talking about Yehudites, we're talking about, how many know a more specific group? We're talking about people of Israelite origin. We're talking about people who were the origin of the 10 tribes. However, those few did something quite amazing. You know, it's not if you do the great thing on your own, but sometimes a few people can't do a great deal. And in Berlin, how many know Berlin was the headquarters of the Third Reich? And so the Huguenots had once settled there. And believe it or not, during the Holocaust, more Jews were given shelter than in any other German city. How many would say that was shocking to you? Because you thought that would be probably where the most would have been Jewish people would have been taken. But more were given shelter than in any other German city. Well, that was in another country, but we will get to that whole story. But yeah, but when you can think about that, And by the way, and most of them were saved by Christians. Now, Sweden was founded in about 800 AD when the Swedes, the Suoni, same people group, just different names, and the Goths, again, different name, but same people group, became independent from Denmark. And these two people groups had already united together in about 500 AD, some 500s. And the Swedes derived mainly from the tribe of Gad. So most of the Swedes derived from the tribe of Gad. And in this particular map, and this is the map that you would see in the one that has the two maps, the map at the top, and you will begin to see Suonis, you begin to see some of these people groups, and they're in more detail on this map. If you want to take a look at this map, even on your own time, to say, oh, I remember, okay, we talked about these people. You can see this is the area of the Germanic tribes, and then you see the Suonis, or Suionis. It's going to come out at different times, but you can't see that on that map, probably better than some of the others. The names of most tribal groups that settled in Sweden are those of the sons of Gad. So if you go back to the Bible, and you will look at, and the sons of Gad are, and they'll list them. Those are the names of those that became people groups in Sweden. Okay. So, any questions on note 25? Comments? Okay, to assist you in doing further research on your own, I am giving you this information. Now, please remember that due to God's plan of making the descendants of Abraham a blessing to the world, and by the way, to the whole world, this list may not be exhaustive. And as you do study on your own, you may come back and say, I found another people group in this group, and I would say, wonderful. This is not meant to be exhaustive. And so you'll notice I put a little note, that's just to you, happy researching. Because as you keep researching, you're going to find more and more groups. Why? Because the sons had sons that had sons that had sons, and sometimes what? Daughters. And they became people groups. So we're going to look at generally the peoples of Gad. We know that Gad was a name for Goths. Gad was a name for Goths. Gudos, G-U-D-O-S, Gudos was also a name for the Goths. And I know you're going to know the next one, because we've done it. I mean, I know there were quite a few Gettais. We've been looking at some of the Versagettai, Nassagettai. Gettai were a Gothic group in the Balkans and Scandinavia. Scandinavia. And I'll probably keep saying this to you. It could also be Scandinavia, because obviously if you take all the consonants out, it's the same name. And Guti was a name for the Goths both in Scandinavia and east of the Caspian Sea. So if you will look at the Caspian Sea, you'll see that was way far east. Kind of interesting, this is just on a sidebar that will have significance in the end time. But if you go up from the eastern end of the Caspian Sea, you will see angles, and then you'll see something that you may have, a term you may have heard of before, Magog.
Yeah.
And it's just quite interesting because that's way east. And that's because there was a segment of the people of Magog who migrated far east into the area that is today known as China. And if you want to start connecting some dots with that, you might be very interested in that. Then you had the Guthones, and the Guthones, and it could be Guthon or Guton. Why? You can tell me why. Because it can be pronounced both ways, a hard T or a soft T. So they were Goths on the coast of the Baltic Sea. Now, I mean, the Baltic Sea is further north. Because these people did not stay put. Once they had gained some freedom, they began to migrate, both, by the way, west, north, as well as east. And the sixth group were the Gautoi in Scandinavia. Scandinavia. Now, then we had another people group, the seventh people group that came from Gad, were the Gradosia, and we find the Gadrosia, you can even see Gad right there,
Yeah.
Gadrosia, were found in Iran, I-R-A-N. And I would say to you that there may very well be descendants of Gadrosia living in parts of Iran today. Why do I say that? Because not everybody migrates, right? There are some people who are still living in the area in which their great-great-grandparents lived, their grandparents lived. Now, many others are gone. Many others have migrated, and even in our day, right? Now, in my case, I moved away from where I was born and traveled many places, and now I happen to be living in the same city where I was born. But it took me decades to get back here and live here. But many people stay. So there's a good chance that there are some people who are descendants of the Gadrosi that are still in Iran today. They may not know who they are, and I would definitely say that other Iranians don't know who they are, or they wouldn't be where they are. They're there. And the eighth people group is the Pasar Gadoi. And guess where they are? In Iran. And this is what's really interesting, because this word, Pasar Gadoi, means sons, S-O-N-S, of Gad. And that is the word that means sons of Gad in ancient Pahlavi dialect of ancient Iran. Now that is the Pahlavi dialect, not Farsi, but it is an Iranian language. Now, why would they call a people group sons of Gad unless what? They were sons of Gad, or descendants of Gad, which is kind of interesting. The ninth people group is the Thatagitis, and they are located in ancient Afghanistan. Then you had the 10th people group, which is the Gadini, and they are located in Scotland. Now, I've given you a little note there. There are Gadini in Scotland. However, there are also some Gadini who don't come from Gad, but they come from Gideoni of Benjamin. And just so you know that I'm telling you the truth, if you will look in your Bibles in Numbers, and I do this so that you will understand that there were intermingling of tribes as they migrated. So in Numbers 10:24, and the army of the tribe of the children of Benjamin was Abidan, the son of Gideoni. So you're seeing already that Gideoni came from the tribe of Benjamin, also had descendants, and strangely enough, they were also called Gadini. Okay, so you had some from Gideoni of Benjamin and some from Gideon of Manasseh that were also given the name Gadini. And you'll see that if you want to look at that and read the whole chapter of Judges 6, you can do that. And you'll see that there's also some people that are going to be named Gadini that came from Gideon of Manasseh. So what do you see here? Remember what I said, when they start migrating and moving and intermingling with each other, you're going to see that the tribes are going to get together, and it's very hard to delineate exactly who they are, but we know they're what? Israelites. So you have, in the Gadini, you have what? You have Gad, Benjamin, and Manasseh, all contributing to this people group, but guess what? They're all brethren. The 11th people group is Guide Hall in ancient Scotland and possibly Ireland. So there's some Gad in Scotland and now also Ireland. The 12th people group from Gad is the Gadingas, and that should be Arsene, not Arsene. Arsene as an Anglo-Saxon associated subtribe. So what do we know about the Gadingas? Well, somewhere along the line they mingled with the Angles and the Saxons, and more than likely intermarried. Okay, and then they were then a subtribe because they're part of this and part of this. Took on the name, obviously, of probably the most prominent group, part of the group, so they carried on the name of Gadingas. Okay, any questions about kind of giving you people groups from the tribe of Gad? Again, these are names then, if you want to do some research on your own and say, okay, where did the tribe of Gad went? Where did they go? Where have they gone? Well, they went many different places, and then you can kind of trace that through these names. Now we're going to look at the clans of Gad, because that becomes important. So when we say people groups of Gad, those are the direct descendants of Gad and his sons. Then you're going to have clans of Gad that come from the sons, and they're going to have what? Sons and descendants and descendants. So the first one we're going to look at is Ziphion or Thiphaly. And the reason why you can kind of look at where they're going on your maps is because when you look at the maps and I say, well, they came from Scythia or they came from here, then you're going to know, okay, they started in this area when they were clans and then they started moving out. These were Gothic from Scythia, okay? So we know where Scythia is. Scythia right above the Black Sea. This is Scythia. And they migrated to France. So this would be, so they migrated all the way from here, and probably not quickly, but they began to move from above the Black Sea, and they ended up in this area. France. Then you had the Hagi, or the Hagi, or the Chasi, or Hasi, Hachi, actually it's Hachi or Chachi. And these Franks were known as Hugo and as Hoking. And they were what? Also Franks. They were also in the area of France. And we know all about the Hugi and the Hugo. Then you had the Yingling. No, that is not that drink. This is Yingling. And they ended up in Sweden. And these are clans. Now we're talking about clans. That's the sons and the people groups that derive from them. You had the Cauchi, who ended up in Ireland. And Cocaland. And then you had the Huguenots of France. So you're seeing kind of where they kind of ended up. Then you had the Shuni, or the Sunni, and the Suonis, and they ended up, you can see, in this area right here, further north of Sweden. They went to Sweden. So you're seeing quite a bit of Gad in the nation of Sweden. Then you had the Etzbom, which broke up into Bostamai, who were a Gothic Galatian group. And obviously Galatia, if you look on your map, you will see on this map, Galatia. They believe this group came from the southern, this clan of Gad moved from the south of the Black Sea, but did what? Migrated and ended up in this area anyway. Do you see France? It was a Gothic Galatian group. And of course, if you'll see on your map, you'll see that this area right here is modern day Turkey. They came from here. They didn't come from Scythia. This clan moved from what is modern day Turkey, Galatia, moved up here and still ended up in France. Then you had the Hastings, or the Hastings, and they were a Vandal group that invaded England. So they're moving even further westward. So they invaded England. They also invaded Scotland. They just kept coming, and they just took over. Somewhere along the line, they took the prophetic word that they would be the head and not the tail, and they would rise to the top seriously, and they did, everywhere they went. Then you had, any questions about the 7th clan group? The 8th clan group was Osnabrück. In Frankish, who can kind of take a look at the name and tell me which nation? Germany. Frankish Germany. Osnabrück. We're beginning to see some, they ended up in many different countries, even in Europe. The 9th clan group was Eri or Gary, or Granny, Grani, of Sweden. And this Eri Gary Granny also gave rise to the Griotingi of Goths and Sweden. So in other words, there were Griotingi people groups from that clan of Eri. Some of them were Goth people groups, and some of them just moved into Sweden. The 10th clan group was Arodi or Ha-Arodi or Harudi. Now the reason why I'm not expecting you to remember these, but if you keep this and want to do some research on your own, you're going to see that it's the same people group, a little bit different name that they're called, but they're the same clan. They come from the same person, descendant. They come from the same descendant of Gad. And these people ended up in Norway. The Arodi also became the Haredgoths of Scandinavia. The 11th clan was Arili or Ha-Aruli, again, same people group, just a little bit different name. And the Aruli associated with Goths and Sweden. Again, why would that be? Because these are family groups, and they're going to, as they move, they're going to immediately look for people that they're like-minded or they're like them. And then you have the 12th group, the Guni, or the Kuni, who became Huns, Huns. And the Guni also became the Egon of Denmark. Denmark, D-E-N-M-A-R-K. They also gave rise to the Gugurni of Holland, H-O-L-L-A-N-D, or the Netherlands location. Okay, any questions? So you're seeing that the bulk of these people went where? Into the area of the north, such as Holland, Norway, Denmark. They're up in that area. Some went to Germany, Sweden. A small group, small clan went into, obviously, England. Okay? Any questions on note 27? Okay, note 28. The name Gad comes from the Hebrew word Gadud, and it is translated troop. So when this son of Israel was given his name, he said, oh, that troop is within me. Troop. Probably felt like a troop. But it also means group, and then this becomes very important, and I want you just to kind of post-it note this word somewhere in the back of your mind. Collectivity. Collectivity. Group or collectivity. A collective. Now what this means is that it seems that Gad needed to join with others. In other words, Gad was not kind of independent. I can do it on my own. I don't want to join with anybody else. We want to do our thing. It seemed like wherever Gad went, whether it was when they first got their land allotment in the Promised Land, or when they moved on, it seemed like they always had to join with someone else. And you'll notice here, there's quite a few clans coming from Gad. So they had to be a part of a whole. And so because God joined and intermingled with other nations. And that's Gad, because God had them. God had Gad joined and intermingled with other nations. It is possible that their Israelite lineage was to a large measure diluted. Now, true, they intermingled with other tribes. They intermingled with other people groups from other tribes, but at the same time, of all of the tribes, they seem to have intermingled with other people groups more often. And so their Israelite lineage was to a large measure diluted. Now, working together and helping one another is a very big part of Swedish, S-W-E-D-I-S-H, culture, and it is. If you don't know anything about Sweden, in Sweden, concern for the community and helping neighbors is strongly valued. They'll band together and help one another, and to a great extent. Now, up until 1718 AD, now that was before the United States of America was birthed, so we're talking about before that time. Jews could not officially, permanently live in Sweden without changing their religion. So the only way you can come here to live is if you change your religion. Now, before that date, okay, Jews have been coming and going through Sweden. In other words, it's like this, well, you're allowed to migrate through here, but it's migrate through. The operative word through. You can go through, but you can't stay. But were not allowed to remain. Now, gradually, that situation improved, and in 1905 is quite a ways from 1718. But in 1905, there were approximately 4,000 Jewish people living in Sweden. During the war, and I would say World War II, it should be World War II, it seems that Sweden tried to ignore the moral issues that were involved in the war. And they played both sides of the war for a profit. And sometimes you just have to look at the history and declare what it was. Does that mean that every person in Sweden was compromising? No, of course not. So Sweden, early in World War II, supplied iron ore to Germany, but otherwise distanced itself from the Nazis. And a little later on, Sweden was inclined more to the Allies side. And Sweden trained Norwegian soldiers. So they were training Norwegian soldiers who, by the way, were allied with the Allies. Okay, Norway. And I told you the story of how the government of Norway used children riding on their sleds to secret out the gold, which was the wealth of the nation, so that that would not fall into the hands of the Germans during World War II. There they were riding their sleds right under the noses of Nazi soldiers. They just thought these children were just having fun on sleds. What they were doing were on their sleds, riding their sleds, carrying out the wealth of the nation of Norway. And so they trained Norwegian soldiers. The Swedish merchant navy was leased to Britain during the war. In other words, okay, you can kind of see what it is. We're not going to do this, but we will loan our merchant navy to the British in the war effort. Nazi Joseph Goebbels, and that is, by the way, if you know German, that's pronounced Goebbels, not Goebbels, or Goebbels, unless you want to just insult me, it is Goebbels, was Hitler's propaganda minister. Now, I'm going to stop here for a little bit. Remember Hitler's big thing, and by the way, Hitler was dark-eyed and dark-haired. You know anything about him. But he was obsessed with supposedly the Aryan race. Blonde hair, blue eyes. Remember? And there was a movie made about that. And basically, some of the doctors in the Third Reich were doing experimentation so that everyone would be born with blonde hair, blue eyes. So he found the blonde Swedes contemptible. In other words, they were blonde hair, but they just didn't act like he thought they should act. So in fact, he said to the Swedish people, Germanic on the outside, half Jewish on the inside. We know that there were Jewish people of Jewish descent who had blonde hair and blue eyes, particularly in Denmark, but other places. The Swedish aristocrat and diplomat, and by the way, he was Lutheran, Raoul Wallenberg. And if you've done any study of Raoul Wallenberg in Hungary, he was a Swedish diplomat, and he saved thousands of Jews. And what he would do, he would provide them with protective passports from the nation of Sweden. And while he was the Swedish diplomat, he also rented 32 buildings funded by the United States. So in other words, the United States funneled money to Raoul Wallenberg to rent 32 buildings. He declared them Swedish diplomatic facilities, and this gave the people sheltered in these buildings diplomatic immunity. That's how he saved all these Jewish people. By the way, Raoul Wallenberg was an honorary citizen of the United States, Canada, Israel, Australia. Those countries all gave him honorary citizenship. He was captured by Soviet forces, and we believe he was captured on January the 17th, 1945. We believe, because we don't really know what happened to him, he disappeared. We believe he died in July 1947 in a Russian prison. There were some diplomatic confidential talks between Russia and Sweden, and it was finally confirmed that he actually was executed by the Russians. Now, in 1947, Sweden voted in favor of the United States Partition Plan, P-A-R-T-I-T-I-O-N, Partition Plan for Palestine. So Sweden was one of those nations who voted in favor of that plan. This provided the legal, L-E-G-A-L, foundation for the creation of the state of Israel. Now, politics will always get, I will just say it, politics will always get in and muddy up things. That's exactly what happened here. Because the Swedish man who was appointed by the United Nations to negotiate a permanent truce between Jews and Arabs was suspected of being pro-Arab and was assassinated by a rogue Jewish underground organization. Sweden then attempted to delay the acceptance of the nation of Israel into the United Nations. Now, the reason being that the man that was assassinated was Count Folke Bernadotte. His first name, F-O-L-K-E, if you want to write it down. Bernadotte, B-E-R-N-A-D-O-T-T-E. And it just so happened that this man, who seemed to be pro-Arab in the discussions, just happened to be a nephew of King Gustav V. King Gustav, G-U-S-T-A-F, the fifth, so he's the king. So obviously that was going to play into this. So they attempted then to delay the acceptance of the nation of Israel into the United Nations. And please hear me. Notice I said a rogue Jewish underground organization. It had nothing to do with the Jews who were living in that area at that time, who were going to make up the initial population of the state of Israel. In fact, you should note that the majority of the Jewish people in Palestine at that time opposed this underground group. In no way did that rogue underground group have anything to do with the Jewish people living in that area. And so relations between Israel and Sweden improved in the decades of the 1950s and 1960s. But in the decades since, the country has often taken pro-Palestinian stance. P-A-L-E-S-T-I-N-I-A-N. And by the way, there has never been a nation called Palestine. It was the name given to that area as an insult to the Jewish people, the Yehudahites in Judea. And so they named it after the Philistines to insult the people. There was never a separate country called Palestine. Never, ever. That was Arab. Never. N-E-V-E-R. Never. There is no such place. Never was. Every person who calls themselves a Palestinian basically is a liar, because they are not Palestinian. They come from one of a number of Arab nations of the world. They are of Arab descent, whether it's Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Yemen, wherever. It's been a ruse to try and get a part of that area known as Israel. So check it out. And here's the book. You want to know the truth. Now, you're going to do a lot of reading, a great deal of reading, but it's a book called From Time Immemorial. From Time Immemorial. It's about this thick, but you don't have to read very far to you. The author of this book is a woman. She was pro-Palestinian when she started writing this book. She wrote the book on a challenge because someone said, find the real truth. Okay, you say this, find the real truth. So she did. She said, I'm going to find the truth. Well, of course you know what the truth was, and the truth is in that book. There never was a Palestinian people, and what they have said, but like I said, it's well worth the read. I was telling you, it is well worth the read, from time immemorial. And then when anybody comes up to you and starts spouting off they've taken our land, they are occupying our land, just say, why don't you read this? And you'll find out who the land truly belongs to. Very interesting. And like I said, she started with one, and she has talked, some of you may have heard her, because I know she was on Zola Levin's program when he lived for 2 or 3 times. She's been on other programs, but it's an awesome read, awesome read. So in 1947, they voted, they tried to delay it, and guess what? Well, they then kind of waffled back and forth. So while offshoots of Gad, such as Goths in Italy, right now I want you to see, they're found in other places, Goths in Italy and France. So you had Goths. Why would the Goths in Italy and France have been willing to help the Jewish people and express pro-Israel positions? They're Goths. They're what? They're descendants of Gad. Now, they may think they're doing it they've looked at the world situation, or they look at the political situation, or this is where we're going to stand. But guess what? It's in the DNA. They're brothers. The same cannot be said of the nation of Sweden itself. It just cannot be. They're kind of all over the place. Okay. Questions, comments?
Read the beginning of 33.
33?
The beginning, yeah.
Beginning. Okay, in 1947, Sweden voted in favor of the United Nations partition plan for Palestine. This provided the legal foundation for the creation of the state of Israel. And then because of the assassination of Count von Bernadotte, assassinated by a rogue Jewish underground organization, Sweden attempted to delay the acceptance of the nation of Israel into the United Nations. Okay? And then relations between Israel and Sweden improved in the decades of the 1950s and 1960s, but in the decades since, the country has often taken pro-Palestinian stance. And while offshoots of Gad, such as Goths in Italy and France, have been willing to help the Jewish people and express pro-Israel positions, the same cannot be said of the nation of Sweden itself. They have not. I want to read the Swedish Secretary of State, Hans Dahlgren, makes the following remark regarding Raoul Wallenberg. And as you know, as I said, he died executed by the Soviets. And remember, in World War II, the Soviets, notice, and I'm going to put it this way, were supposed to be allies of the Allies. But they wanted to basically, they wanted to go in, and I will say this about our own country. I think the United States made a monumental error in allowing the Russian troops to enter from the Eastern Front before our troops went into these areas. Which I don't have to tell you what it led to with the division of Germany and the whole Eastern Bloc nations that they took over. And it was under horrific conditions for a long time. And nothing much has changed with the Russians. I don't know how I think about Russia. I don't know how many of you have, there is an arrest warrant out for Ted Cruz from Russia. And Lindsey Graham, I can't remember who else. Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, and somebody else. Russia has put out an arrest warrant. And they're all calling them badges of courage. Thank you. We like that. Some things never change. So much for Pootie Poot. And that, by the way, is not original with me. And if you know anything about presidential nicknames, that Pootie Poot nickname was given to him by one of our presidents. And this is what he says about Raoul Wallenberg. He did not ask what needed to be done. He did not need a decision-making process in the face of evil. His unerring moral compass indicated the path that he should take. Raoul Wallenberg thus set an example. He knew that we need not always be prepared to do what is right. He showed that we are all able to meet a challenge. That is very good. I want to tell you in closing about an American who also helped Jewish refugees escape from Vichy, France. That is a man by the name of Varian Fry. V-A-R-I-O-N-F-R-Y, Varian Fry. And I'm trying to think, it had to be over 20 some years ago. The Jewish community had an exhibit in honor of Varian Fry. And he was kind of I would say, in France, did much of the same type of thing that Raoul Wallenberg did. Didn't get a great many accolades till many decades after his death, but certainly was a hero in protecting Jews in France. Okay, comments, questions? Yes. Everything is clear. Okay, next week we will begin the study of the tribe of Asher. Tribe of Asher. We're glad you joined us by any way, whether you came and are sitting in front of me tonight, whether you're watching from near or far. Thank you for taking the time to study again. I want you to see that God is working his plan. And I hope that even as we study these tribes, that you are learning something. I pray that the Lord is working something in you. First of all, I hope the Lord is working in your innermost being the courage to take a stand for what's right. To say, I don't care what the world is doing. I don't care when I know that there's something that is needed to be done because it's right. I'm just going to do it no matter what, knowing that God is on the side of the righteous.
Yes.
And remember this, there may be times when we cannot do anything to stop evil, but there must never be a time when we do not protest. That's a quote from the great man Elie Wiesel. Have a wonderful night. We'll be looking at you next week.